Maybe if you stopped trying to act like a man, you'd finally make a decent wife. That's what my husband, Mark, said one night while pushing away his dinner plate. The same dinner I'd cooked after a 12-hour shift at the clinic. The words didn't even sound angry. They sounded tired, casual, like he was simply stating a fact. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. I stared at the chicken I'd overcooked and tried to swallow the lump rising in my throat. I didn't argue. I'd learned not to. After 20 years of marriage, silence had become my armor. Mark didn't yell. He didn't hit. He just controlled. In small ways at first, what I wore to family dinners, how much I should smile when his friends came over, how I shouldn't go out with co-workers because it doesn't look right. And I obeyed. Because that's what I thought love was, compromise. Because I was 48 and everyone around me said, at least he provides. But that night something cracked. When he went upstairs, I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, staring at the clock on the microwave. 10:14 p.m. I listened to the pipes rattle as he ran the shower. I should have gone to bed, but instead, I took out my phone and opened a photo from our 10th anniversary. We were standing by a lake, smiling, his arm around my waist. I looked at that younger version of me, the one who used to laugh without checking if it was too loud. Where had she gone? I remembered the early years, how he used to bring me coffee at work, how we'd drive to the mountains just to watch sunsets. Back then, I thought he was protective. I thought it was love when he said, I just worry about you too much. But somewhere between then and now, worry had turned into control. Protection had turned into ownership. And I had disappeared beneath it all. The turning point didn't come with a big fight or a dramatic discovery. It came in whispers, moments I'd ignored. Like when he quietly moved all our savings into an account only he could access. Or when he called me ungrateful for wanting to go back to school. Or when he started tracking my location, just for safety. He said it was love. But love doesn't make you feel small. I remember sitting there in that kitchen, phone in my hand, realizing something painful. I had no one left to call. I'd pushed my friends away because they didn't understand marriage. I'd stopped visiting my sister because Mark didn't like her attitude. He'd isolated me, and I'd let him. But that night, I promised myself one quiet thing. I would find my way back to peace, even if it meant starting from zero. So I started watching, listening, not reacting. When he spoke sharply, I didn't argue. I took mental notes. When he changed the passwords on our accounts, I wrote them down in a notebook I kept in my purse. When he said, you don't need to worry about the bills, I smiled, but I started collecting every receipt I could find. I wasn't ready to fight yet, but I was done being blind. That was the night I stopped being scared of being alone. That was the night I quietly began to take my life back. They say when you live with control for long enough, you stop noticing it. You start thinking it's normal. But once you see it, really see it, you can't unsee it again. The next morning, I woke up before Mark. The house was still, sunlight barely touching the curtains. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, staring at the faint lines around my eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't feel shame about them. They weren't signs of aging. They were proof that I'd lived. Proof that I'd endured. Mark came in a few minutes later, buttoning his shirt. You're up early, he said, voice calm but distant. I couldn't sleep, I replied. He glanced at me in the mirror and smiled. That fake, polished smile he used when he wanted to look like the perfect husband. Maybe you should try one of those sleeping pills I told you about. That's when I realized how subtle his control had become. Even my rest wasn't mine anymore. When he left for work, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. No sugar, just how I liked it before he convinced me to drink it the right way. Then I opened my laptop. It felt like committing a crime, but all I did was type one thing into Google. Divorce lawyers near me. My heart raced as if someone might catch me. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the neighbor's dog barking, made me jump. But I didn't close the tab. I read. I learned. In California, where I lived, I found out that financial abuse counted as domestic abuse. That meant something. It meant I wasn't crazy. It meant what I'd been living through had a name. That night, after Mark went to bed, I started small. I found my birth certificate, my social security card, my old checkbook with my name only. I hid them in a shoebox behind the laundry detergent, the one thing he never touched. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The next day, I called an old friend, Linda, from work. We hadn't spoken in years. I half expected her not to answer. But she did. Claire, she said, her voice soft but surprised. Wow, it's been forever. Are you okay? That question broke something open inside me. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say I was fine. But instead, I said quietly, no, I'm not. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. And for the first time in years, I heard my own voice tell the truth about the money, the isolation, the constant control. When I finished, she said, you don't sound crazy. You sound like someone waking up. That sentence stayed with me all night. Waking up. The next few weeks, I played the part of the obedient wife. I smiled when Mark showed affection in public. I nodded when he bragged about how lucky I was to have him. I laughed at jokes that made me feel small. But behind that mask, I was building something real. I opened a separate checking account, just for my paycheck. I called the lawyer's office and scheduled a consultation for a friend. And I started documenting every insult, every manipulation, every locked account. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. Each step, no matter how small, made me feel alive again. Then one evening, I made a mistake. I left my phone on the counter, open to an email from the law office. Mark saw it. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He just looked at me and said, "What are you doing, Claire?" His tone was calm, almost gentle, and that made it worse. My hands started to shake. But for the first time, I didn't look away. "I'm getting information," I said softly. For myself. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that told me life as I knew it had just changed. He didn't speak for almost a full minute, just stared at me like I was a stranger sitting in his kitchen. Then Mark chuckled, a low, deliberate sound that made my skin crawl. "For yourself," he repeated. "After everything I've done for you?" He sat down, folded his hands, and looked at me like a disappointed father rather than a husband. "Claire," he said, "you don't need a lawyer. You need rest. You've been overwhelmed lately." It was his favorite tactic, calm, reasonable gaslighting. He knew if he kept his voice even, it would make me doubt my own. But this time, something inside me didn't bend. I'd been rehearsing this moment without even knowing it. "I'm fine," I said. "And I don't need you to tell me what I need." The air between us turned heavy, sharp. His jaw twitched. "Don't turn this into something it's not." I looked at him, the man I'd once promised to love forever, and realized something chilling. He wasn't angry because I'd talked to a lawyer. He was angry because for the first time, I hadn't asked permission. That night, I locked the bathroom door and cried quietly on the floor. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The days that followed felt like walking on cracked glass. Mark's tone changed. He stopped saying honey and started saying my name like it was a warning. He checked my phone more often. He questioned where I went, who I saw. Every time I left the house, I could feel his eyes on me, even when he wasn't there. But he didn't realize I'd already built my escape in silence. The lawyer had advised me not to make sudden moves. "Stay calm," she'd said. "Build your case. Gather documents. Don't alert him too soon." So that's what I did. Every night after he fell asleep, I quietly copied files, bank statements, emails, tax returns, onto a USB drive. Each click of the mouse felt like a rebellion. Each printed page was a small piece of my freedom. Still, there were moments of doubt. In the mornings, when he made coffee and said good morning, in that polite, distant tone, part of me wanted to pretend everything was fine. After 20 years, the routine felt safe, even if it was suffocating. But then he'd say something, small, cutting, that reminded me why I couldn't go back. Like when he said, "You should be grateful you don't have to worry about money. Some women would kill for your life." That sentence stuck to me like a stain. Because it was true, from the outside we looked perfect. Big house. 2 cars. Smiles at dinner parties. But behind closed doors, I'd become invisible. One Friday afternoon, I left work early. My lawyer, Ms. Jordan, had found a legal loophole that allowed me to secure part of our joint assets before filing. I signed the papers with trembling hands, feeling half terrified, half alive. When I got home, Mark was waiting in the living room. He held up the USB drive, my USB drive, between his fingers. "Looking for this?" he said, voice calm, eyes cold. My blood turned to ice. He'd found it. I tried to steady my breathing. "Why were you in my purse, Mark?" He smiled. "Because you've been sneaking around like a criminal." I had to make sure my wife wasn't doing anything stupid. There it was, my wife. Possession disguised as concern. I met his stare. "I'm not your property." His face darkened, and for a split second, I saw something dangerous in his eyes. He stepped closer, voice low. Be careful what you say next. But I didn't back down. Not this time. Or what? I asked quietly. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. He turned away, jaw tight. You're making a big mistake, Claire. Maybe I was. But it was finally my mistake to make. That night, I packed a small bag, just essentials: toothbrush, wallet, birth certificate, car keys. I hid it in the trunk of my car. I didn't know when I'd leave. But I knew I would. It was a Wednesday. Cold, gray, uneventful. One of those days that feels too quiet, like the air is holding its breath. Mark had left early for work. I stood by the kitchen counter, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. The house looked the same, but something in me had changed. The fear that once kept me frozen had turned into clarity. I wasn't waiting for courage anymore. I was courage. That morning, I called Linda. It's time, I said. She didn't ask questions. She just said, I'm coming. By noon, I had packed a second bag, clothes, a few photos, my grandmother's necklace, and a folder of documents. My heart was racing, but my mind was calm. I knew Mark's routine down to the minute. He wouldn't be home until after 6. For once, I used that predictability to my advantage. At 2:45, Linda's old blue Subaru pulled into the driveway. I hugged her like someone who had been underwater too long and finally came up for air. You ready? She asked. I nodded. As I'll ever be. We loaded my bags quickly, quietly. I locked the front door, not because I was protecting the house, but because I was closing a chapter. When we pulled away, I didn't look back. But halfway down the street, I started to cry, not from fear, but from release. The tears came hard and fast, soaking my sleeve. Linda reached over and held my hand. You're doing the right thing, Claire. I wanted to believe that. We drove straight to a small extended-stay hotel near Santa Rosa. The lawyer had recommended it. A quiet place where I could stay under my own name without alerting him right away. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city lights outside. I felt a mix of freedom and grief, like I'd amputated a part of myself to survive. Because leaving isn't just walking out. It's mourning everything you thought your life was supposed to be. The next morning, the messages started. At 6:12 a.m. Where are you? Then, you're overreacting. We can talk about this. Then, you're destroying our marriage. And finally, the one that chilled me the most. You won't last a week without me. I didn't reply. I blocked his number. Then I took a deep breath and turned my phone off completely. For the first time in 2 decades, I wasn't waiting for his approval, his anger, or his apology. It was quiet, beautifully, terrifyingly quiet. I made coffee with the little hotel machine, sat by the window, and watched the sunrise. The light felt different. Softer. Like it was finally touching me again. But peace doesn't come without a cost. 2 days later, I got a call from my lawyer. He's already filed for temporary financial control, she said. He's claiming you're emotionally unstable. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. Of course he would try to rewrite the story. Of course he'd paint himself as the calm, rational husband. That's what men like him do. They twist reality until it looks like truth. But this time I had evidence. Documents. Witnesses. My own words written down in detail. I wasn't the woman who cried in silence anymore. I was the woman who could finally prove what she had endured. That evening, Linda brought takeout and a bottle of cheap wine. We sat on the hotel bed, laughing softly, half from exhaustion, half from disbelief. She raised her glass. To freedom, she said. I raised mine. To peace. And for the first time in years, the word didn't feel impossible. It felt like a promise. Still, a small part of me knew this wasn't over. Men like Mark don't give up control easily. But neither did I, not anymore. That night, as I drifted to sleep, I whispered to myself, I'm not running. I'm rebuilding. And deep down, I knew the real battle was about to begin. It wasn't long before the court date was set. Mark's lawyers were aggressive, predictable, trying to paint me as irrational, impulsive, and unfit to handle money or decisions. I walked into the courtroom that morning and felt the weight of years pressing on me. My shoulders were tense, my palms sweaty, but my heart was steady. He was there, immaculate as always, suit crisp, hair perfectly combed. He smiled at me like he hadn't spent 2 decades undermining every decision I'd ever made. The lawyer gave me a reassuring nod. Stay calm. Speak only when asked. I nodded, keeping my focus. When my turn came, I spoke clearly, directly, without emotion masking the truth. I have documentation of our finances, emails, and statements, I said. I've maintained all accounts, bills, and responsibilities professionally. The idea that I am incapable is false. Mark's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge held up a hand. Let her finish. I did. Every word precise. Every fact undeniable. Every detail calculated. For the first time, my voice wasn't shaking in fear. It was firm, measured, and true. Afterward, outside the courtroom, Mark approached. His smile was gone. His face was tight. I don't know why you're doing this, he said quietly, almost pleading. I looked him in the eyes. Really looked like I hadn't been allowed to for 20 years. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I said. I'm doing this to save myself. He shook his head. You're making a mistake. We can fix this. I laughed softly, a sound that startled even me. No, Mark. I'm fixing me. And that's not your choice anymore. He opened his mouth to speak again, but I turned and walked away, the sunlight catching my face in a way that felt almost symbolic, like I was stepping into a life I had reclaimed. Back at the hotel, I unpacked my small suitcase again. I placed my grandmother's necklace on the nightstand, a reminder of roots, resilience, and the women who came before me. I started making plans, not just legal but personal. Classes I had postponed, trips I'd dreamed of, friends I'd neglected. I realized that reclaiming control wasn't just about protecting my money or rights. It was about rebuilding my identity. The following weeks were tense. Mark tried to intimidate through lawyers, phone calls, and emails. He even tried mutual friends, hoping someone would convince me to return. But each attempt only strengthened me. I was learning that power isn't loud. Power is quiet. Power is deliberate. Power is knowing your worth and standing by it. I kept a small notebook where I recorded each encounter, times, words, emails. It became my armor, my evidence, and my ritual. Every entry reminded me that I wasn't powerless. Then came the day of the settlement hearing. The courtroom was quiet except for the shuffle of papers and whispered instructions. When the judge read the decision, granting me secure access to finances, temporary custody of our shared responsibilities, and protective clauses, I felt a wave of relief that I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. Mark's face paled. He looked at me with a mix of disbelief and anger. But I didn't flinch. I just nodded once, respectfully, and walked out of that courtroom with my head held high. For the first time in 20 years, I felt like the author of my own story. That evening, sitting alone in my hotel room, I allowed myself to breathe. The tension in my shoulders began to melt. The knots in my stomach loosened. And for the first time in decades, I felt a quiet, steady peace. I whispered to myself, this is mine. My life. My choices. My freedom. Freedom is never handed over quietly. Even after the courtroom victory, Mark didn't stop. He tried to pull me back into his orbit through manipulation, subtle threats, and appeals to guilt. One morning, I received a long, calculated email from him. Think about what you're doing, Claire. You're destroying the family. You'll regret this. I read it twice, then printed it and added it to my growing stack of evidence. I realized something crucial. His goal wasn't to reconcile or even argue. It was to make me shrink. To make me doubt that I deserved peace. But I didn't shrink. That day, I walked into the local library and enrolled in a financial planning course. I wanted to understand investments, budgeting, and credit like never before. If he wanted to control money, I would master it, quietly, deliberately, without him knowing. The weeks became a dance of tension and strategy. Mark tried to contact mutual friends. He posted cryptic messages online, insinuating that I was unstable. One evening, I ran into a neighbor who asked cautiously, "Is everything okay?" I smiled calm and said, "Better than it's been in years." He didn't like that. Then came the social pushback. At a charity gala, Mark tried to corner me. He smiled at the guests, projecting charm, while he leaned in close and whispered, "You think this little victory changes anything? People will talk. You'll look foolish." I looked him in the eyes, for the first time without fear, and said softly, "I don't care what they think. I care what I know is true." He froze. His smile faltered. For once, his words had no power over me. I realized that this pushback wasn't about logic. It was about control. And control was exactly what I had reclaimed. The emotional pressure intensified. Mark's lawyer tried delaying tactics. He sent surprise visits. He called relatives to check in on me. But every move I made was calculated. I documented each interaction. I spoke with my lawyer regularly. I stayed grounded in reality, not his distorted version. Even my own emotions became allies. When doubt crept in, I reminded myself, fear is a signal, not a command. When anger flared, I wrote it down. It became evidence, not impulsive action. When sadness came, I let it flow for 10 minutes, then let it go. It was exhausting, but it worked. One evening, after a particularly tense phone call from Mark, I walked to the window, looking at the city lights flickering in the dusk. I whispered to myself, I've survived him for years in silence. Now I'm surviving for me. And for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I realized that reclaiming your life isn't just about confronting the abuser. It's about becoming unshakable in your own truth. Mark could push, plead, threaten, but he couldn't touch the woman I was becoming. That night, I sat with my notebook, reviewing all the steps I'd taken so far. I didn't feel triumphant yet. That would come later. But I felt something stronger than fear, anger, or resentment. I felt clarity. I was building a life he couldn't touch. A life that belonged only to me. And deep down, I knew that the pushback, all of it, was proof I was on the right path. The day the truth finally came out started quietly, almost imperceptibly. Mark had grown desperate. He began sending threatening emails, calling my workplace, even showing up at the hotel reception asking if I was staying there. Each time, I documented everything. Each time, I stayed calm, deliberate, unshakable. Finally, the final hearing was scheduled. This was it, the day I would prove that control, manipulation, and emotional abuse could no longer hold me down. I entered the courtroom with a folder of every document I had meticulously gathered over months. Bank statements, emails, text messages, witness statements, photos. Proof of years of control, subtle financial abuse, and isolation. Mark tried his usual charm. He smiled at the judge, gave a practiced bow of his head, and began a rehearsed story about a difficult wife making false accusations. But this time, I wasn't intimidated. I took a deep breath and started. I've tried to live quietly to avoid conflict, I said, my voice steady. I've been patient. I've collected evidence, not to retaliate, but to protect myself and reclaim my life. The evidence you see here is not about revenge. It's about truth. As I laid out each point, every document, every timeline, I watched Mark's expression change. His calm facade faltered. He whispered to his lawyer, panic flickering behind his eyes. The judge listened carefully, turning pages, nodding occasionally. For the first time in decades, I felt validated. I felt seen. When the judge concluded, he spoke clearly. Based on the evidence presented, the court recognizes the financial and emotional control exerted by Mr. Thompson over Ms. Clark. Orders will be issued to secure Ms. Clark's autonomy, her finances, and her rights. This decision is final. I exhaled a long, trembling sigh that had been held in for years. Relief, shock, and a quiet sense of justice washed over me. Outside the courtroom, Mark tried one last plea. "Claire, we can work this out," he said, voice strained. I looked at him, straight into his eyes, without fear, without hesitation. "No, Mark. I'm done surviving for you. I am living for me now." I walked away. The sun hit my face, warm and real. I didn't look back. That night, in my small rented apartment, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city lights shimmered like scattered diamonds. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, calm. I thought about the woman I had been, silent, obedient, fearful. And I thought about the woman I had become, deliberate, strategic, free. I didn't need validation from anyone anymore. I had my life back. I had my dignity. I had my peace. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly breathe. I realized something profound. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your voice, your rights, and your freedom. And in that quiet moment, I understood that the fight had never been against Mark. It had been against the fear, the doubt, and the silence that he had cultivated in me. And I had won. I placed my grandmother's necklace on the windowsill, catching the moonlight. I whispered to myself, "This is mine. My life. My choices. My peace." And for the first time in decades, I meant it completely. It's been months since the court ruling. Some days, I still wake up and feel the shadow of Mark's control lingering, a faint echo in my mind. But now I recognize it immediately. I name it. I let it pass. It no longer has power over me. I've started taking long walks in the early mornings, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up. I've reconnected with friends I'd pushed away, laughing freely for the first time in decades. I've even started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping others reclaim their power, one quiet step at a time. The apartment I rent is modest, but it's mine. Every item, every corner, reflects me. My choices, my freedom, my life. I keep the notebook where I recorded every insult, every manipulation, every step I took to reclaim control. It no longer feels heavy, it feels like armor and memory. A reminder that I survived, strategized, and rose above it all. Sometimes I think about Mark. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He was never a villain in the classic sense, just a man who confused control with love. I mourn what could have been, yes. But more importantly, I celebrate what is. I look in the mirror and see a woman who has fought, who has endured, who has reclaimed herself piece by piece. Not through loud confrontation, but through quiet persistence, careful planning, and unwavering resolve. And I feel proud. Sometimes late at night, I sit by the window and whisper to myself. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize how strong you really are. But now, I add, and sometimes reclaiming yourself is the most beautiful victory of all. I sip my tea, watch the lights flicker across the skyline, and let the silence fill me with peace. I am free. I am strong. I am myself. And if you were in my place, what would you have done? Write it in the comments.